Good afternoon, and welcome to another episode of the Arcane Leadership Podcast, where we empower tomorrow's leaders through the sharing of knowledge, experience, and inspiring stories. I'm your host, Rob Cameronpour, and my very special guest and friend today is Josh Parnell. He's not only a leadership coach and trainer, he's a professional speaker, author, he was a USAF veteran, and a devoted father and husband. Without any further, before I actually give it to you, Josh, to take over, I would like to thank you so much for joining me today and sharing your knowledge and stories, and I'm sure a lot of the experience that you have under your belt with the folks out here today. Thank you very much, Josh.
Rob, it's an honor to be here, man. Thank you so much for asking me to be here. And it's a pleasure. And I'm looking forward to jumping into this interview with you.
Awesome. Let's get started then. Why don't you start off, Josh, by telling us a little about your story and how you got to where you are today?
Sure. So, and again, Rob, I appreciate the opportunity, man. My story begins, after high school, I had hopes and dreams and aspirations of going to Hollywood to become the next Steven Spielberg. So I
Nice.
had a very strong interest in filmmaking back then. And I found out that the University of North Texas in Denton near Dallas had a great radio, TV, and film program. So I went to UNT, planned on being there for 4 years. But after only a year and a half, UNT said, "Hey, Josh, thanks for playing, but your grades are terrible. You need to leave." So I had a lot of growing up to do. I wasn't making school a priority, and I couldn't go back to school. I also didn't want to come back home. So this was around the time that 9/11 happened, and it got me thinking about joining the military. And I found out that videography was a career field I could do in the Air Force. So I went to my nearest Air Force recruiter's office and I introduced myself. I said, "Hey, my name is Josh Parnell and I'm interested in videography." He said, "Great. We have videography in the Air Force, but it's not available right now. But when you get into basic training, it will be. All you got to do is sign the dotted line." And I was like, "All right, let's do it. Sign me up."
Nice.
And what not the sharpest tool in the shed. UNT dismissed me for a reason. Well, sure enough, when I got into basic training, videography was not an option for me then. And everyone in basic training has to fire the M16, and I think now they fire the M4. But at the time, it was the M16. And prior to joining the Air Force, I had never shot a weapon in my life, so I was not a great shot. In fact, I was such a bad shot that the range instructor, he got pretty frustrated with me. Now, it's important to note that in order to become an expert marksman in the M16, you have to hit the target at least 45 times or more out of 50 rounds. And again, I was not a good shot. I mean, the range instructor got frustrated. He threw an extra 30-round magazine in my rifle. So I did score a 45, but it was out of 80 rounds. And the only people who knew that I shot 80 rounds were me and the range instructor, because even on my score sheet, it showed a 45 out of 50, which technically means I'm still probably one of the worst expert marksmen in the history of the Air Force. But that's an important part of my story, because when it came time for me to figure out what career field am I going to go into, they looked at my score sheet and said, "Well, you're an expert marksman. You're going to be in security forces, which is military police."
Mm.
And I remember thinking, like, that's not really my personality. That's not really that's not really who I am. Can I do something different? They said, "Get out of here to be a cop." And I said, "Okay." So at this point, this was the first time in my brief Air Force career where I realized I had a decision to make. I've learned over the course of my life that the two things that we can control each and every day is our attitude and our effort.
Mhm.
And at this point, I can choose what my attitude is based on the direction that the Air Force was sending me in. Because I could say, you know what, I could be frustrated about this, I could be stressed out, I could be angry and upset, or I can choose positivity. I can still choose to look on the bright side of things. I'm a big believer in perspective. With perspective, the way that we view things drives the way that we do things. And we can have this perspective of, when it rains, it pours. You could also say, when it rains, look for rainbows. And at this point, I said, you know what, I'm going to look for rainbows. I still wanted to travel. I wanted to join the military to go travel the world. I thought I can go to Europe. I can go to all these places across the pond, like Italy and Germany and Belgium and Spain. But of course, the Air Force had other plans. The Air Force decided to send me to beautiful Minot, North Dakota. So Rob, North Dakota is not too far from your neck of the woods in Canada. That is, I mean, I know it's a completely different area, but what I know being from Texas, I'm in Houston, Texas, and what I know now is North Dakota is cold. It is always cold. So, long story short, fast forward, I want to get to what the actual question you asked, but I did join the military. I was in the Air Force for 4 years. I did my entire enlistment in Minot, North Dakota. But I'm so thankful for the way things panned out. I met a lot of amazing peers and mentors who helped me really grow up the way that I wasn't ready for prior to the Air Force. And so after my enlistment, I finished my degree and worked at a few different jobs here and there. Ultimately landed in oil and gas for about 5 years. And I liked what I did, but I didn't love what I did. And there's a quote that I love from Steve Harvey. He says, "Your career is what you're paid for. Your calling is what you're made for."
Mm.
And I knew back then that oil and gas was not my calling. It just wasn't something that was fulfilling for me. And a friend of mine who worked at an automotive repair franchise at the home office here in Houston called and said, "Hey, there's a position opening up here at the home office. I think you'd be a great fit for it. Would you be interested?" And I said, "Man, I don't know anything about cars." He said, "You don't need to. This is to work with people. It's to train and coach people, and that's really what I have a heart for. I love serving people. I love approaching people with a servant leadership mindset." And so I was able to serve in that capacity, in that role for almost a decade, and was able to grow the department and ultimately the brand into a much bigger and better, more successful brand because of the amazing team that I had the opportunity to serve with. And so about a year and a half ago is when I made a very difficult decision to leave a perfectly good career, a perfectly good job with benefits and 401k and a great role to jump into this terrifying world of entrepreneurship.
Nice.
Because I just felt like God was calling me out of what I was doing into something different. And that something different is what I'm doing today as a full-time leadership coach, trainer, and speaker. And I'll tell you, Rob, I absolutely love what I do, man. It is something that I'm truly passionate about. I think going back to Steve Harvey's quote, I do believe that this is my calling. I really find a lot of joy in being able to help and serve others. And in doing so, as you know, as a fellow leadership coach, man, we get to grow as well. Coaching is such an amazing opportunity because you're not the only one who's providing value. It's a reciprocated effort. And I learn so much each and every day from my own clients. And so, man, I'm in an amazing win-win situation, and I couldn't ask for anything better.
Amazing. That's an amazing story, Josh. And working with you, you do have a lot of passion, and you care about what you do. So it's great to see people like yourself, and it's great to be a part of this community with you. Now, I want to take you back to the quote, the Steve Harvey quote, and I know you love quotes, so I'm gonna be asking you a whole bunch today. Now, how do people find out what their calling is, or let's call it their purpose or whatever it may be? How did you come across to finding what you were meant to do, and how do you encourage or advise people to look for what they're meant to do?
That's a great question. A lot of folks that I work with struggle with discovering and defining what their purpose is.
Yes.
And so being able to help people identify what that is, man, I mean, I get goosebumps just thinking about it and talking about it because it truly can be such a fulfilling and rewarding opportunity. To answer your question, I kind of came across this by accident. I didn't know that me being in the role that I was in, I started as a corporate trainer and coach, not realizing exactly what the end was going to look like, but I believe in just taking the next step. And once you take that next step, you'll often identify other opportunities. I think a lot of folks struggle with taking the step because they don't feel like they're ready. They don't feel like they're prepared. They don't feel like this is the right time to take action. And I always say, like, hey, the right time is right now. Just take action, and motivation and confidence tend to follow. But to more further dive deep in your question, I think that purpose is often derived from passion. Mm-hmm. So when you find something that you're passionate about, you can often find little inklings and hints of purpose from your passion. So find something that truly lights your fire. And here's what I mean by this. There's a difference between motivation and inspiration. Motivation is externally driven. Motivation as a coach, we can motivate people all day, but motivation is very much like a flame, and flames come and go. So where's your flame going to be tomorrow? Where's your flame going to be 6 weeks from now or 6 months from now? Inspiration comes from within. So if I can find something I'm truly passionate about, something that I'm inspired by, that I wake up in the morning thinking, even on those days that I'm not necessarily motivated, I understand what and who my purpose is. So I'm disciplined to keep on going, even if I'm feeling a certain kind of way. And it's because I'm inspired. I'm inspired by what is next in terms of my purpose. So in order for me to define, in order for me to find my own purpose in what I'm doing now, I, again, by accident, was kind of thrust into this role where I love people, but I really found my purpose through my passion, which was speaking and training and facilitating and coaching and helping and serving others. And through it all, I remember just, I don't know that it was one day, but I remember there was this kind of this season of my life from like, this is it. Like, this is truly what it is. And it's such an incredible feeling.
It absolutely is. And again, thank you very much for sharing that. I think you nailed it with some of the key points in there. Now, Josh, I want to take you back to the Air Force days, and I want you to think about one thing that you learned there that helped shape your approach to leadership today.
It was perspective. I mentioned earlier that perspective, the way that we view things drives the way that we do things. Something that I share often is that the labels that we either put on ourselves or labels that have been put on us by someone else, they often come with limitations or perceived limitations. And when I entered the Air Force, keep in mind, I was kicked out of school. I mean, school was not, I was not making school a priority. So I had every right to be kicked out because I wasn't putting forth the effort. But in my mind, I just felt like I wasn't smart enough. I wasn't good enough. I had no confidence in my intellectual abilities. And what I was doing was I was putting labels on myself, which came with subsequent limitations. There were opportunities that were out there that I was intentionally not trying to capture because I didn't believe in myself. I didn't think that I could do it. And this stems from limiting beliefs. And what happens is the thoughts that we have dictate the feelings that we have, and our feelings dictate our actions, and our actions dictate our results. So if we're not achieving the results we want to achieve, let's go back to the thoughts that we're having. I didn't think that I was good enough. I did not feel adequate. I did not feel confident in my abilities. Therefore, I did not take any action. And granted, and the results I received were non-existent because I wasn't doing anything. If anything, I was moving backwards. And I'm saying all that to say this: it wasn't until I met some amazing people in the Air Force who helped me recognize, hey man, these are perceived limitations, and our perception is our reality. But keep in mind, you can change your perspective. You can challenge those thoughts. You can ask questions about those thoughts to shift a paradigm and shift your perspective. And so there's a quote. Again, I might drop a handful of quotes, but there's a quote from a poet named NQ, and he says, "Defining myself is like confining myself. So I undefined myself to find myself." So if I'm breaking that quote down, defining myself, putting a label on myself, is like confining myself. That's the limitations. So I undefined myself to find myself. My peers and mentors in the Air Force helped me completely undefine myself because they helped me realize, hey, that label, that's a lie. Like when you fail at something, that doesn't make you a failure. When you lose at something, it doesn't make you a loser. Too many of us allow these actions to become our identities. And we tell ourselves, this is who I am now, therefore I can't. And thankfully, again, I really believe that all these things were meant to happen for me because I was trying to be a filmmaker in Italy, Rob. I didn't try to go to be a cop in North Dakota, but I needed certain people in North Dakota to help me shift my perspective.
Amazing. So, Josh, you talked about confidence, and I know a lot of people struggle with this on a daily basis. Now, what's your recommendation or advice, especially to the younger audience out there, the young professionals who are, trying to climb the corporate ladder or trying to gain some confidence to apply for the promotion or get into what they love doing. How do you gain that confidence as a human being? And what was your experience like?
Get comfortable being uncomfortable.
Yes.
Growth and comfort can't coexist. So take action. Just take action. Take the first step. Don't compare your day one to someone else's day 10,000, because
Yes.
social media, for example, can be difficult. We jump on social media and we see these individuals who are incredibly successful and just making incredible impacts and making a difference in people across the world. And we think that we need to be there right now. But they had a day one years ago, and
That's
it
right.
it takes time, it takes consistency. So take action. Don't compare yourself to those around you. Comparison is the thief of joy. And lastly, nobody's thinking about you as much as you're thinking about you. And
Yes.
and I hope everyone hears really what I'm saying. A lot of us don't take action because we're concerned about, well, what's Rob going to think? What's Josh going to think? What are they going to think? What are they going to say? Trust me, no one's thinking about you as much as you're thinking about you. We are our harshest critics. The most challenging person we will ever lead is ourselves.
That's
And the toughest battle we'll ever face and fight is in between the ears. So just take action. Don't compare yourself to others, and just keep going. Just keep going.
that's great advice, Josh. Now, I want to take you back to your journey,
Mhm.
and I want you to tell us what was the most challenging moment of your career, and how did it shape you? How did it shape you who you are today?
Oh, great question. Um, I feel like there's a number of things that are popping up in my head. I mean, imposter syndrome comes to mind. I think a lot of us may have faced this before. Public speaking comes to mind. Not feeling, ultimately not feeling ready for all these things, which goes back to what I was sharing earlier. Get comfortable being uncomfortable. I'll hang on the public speaking part for a second, because I'm in a season of life now where my career is on coaching, training, and speaking. And so, I'm excited now to capture these opportunities to go and do these massive speaking engagements, which, if you would have known me, I'd say 15 years ago, I'm not supposed to be here. I'm not supposed to be speaking on stage in front of thousands of people.
Hmm.
15 years ago, I struggled with speaking in front of 5 people who were my friends at work. It's like, hey, we're gonna get an update on the department from Josh, and other department updates from the folks in here. And I remember there was a specific day where, I mean, we're thinking, or I'm thinking there's probably 8 people in the room, and I'm just sweating and breathing heavy, heart palpitations, because my turn to eventually share publicly in front of 7 people is I got to speak out loud about what I'm doing. And the irony that I was then later on hired to speak in front of a lot of people, to train and often, and provide presentations. I mean, for 12, 13, 14 years, I was getting comfortable being uncomfortable.
Yeah.
And so it's one of those things where it just takes time. It just takes time.
Amazing. And practice, lots of practice, I bet.
Lots of practice. And
Putting
and in
yourself out
fact,
there.
and I don't want to underestimate the amount of practice that it takes. In fact, here's a story I can share. On a football team. So on a football team, there's 53 men on a football team, and the average game time is about 60 minutes, or not about, it is 60 minutes a game. Do you know the average football player plays an average of only 6 minutes per game?
Hmm.
So, I mean, obviously, you got your quarterbacks who are playing about half the game, but you also got some of the players who rarely play or never play. You got your field goal kickers, your long snappers, your punters, your special teams players. The average player only plays about 6 minutes a game. But think of how much practice is going into that 6 minutes of game time. It's hours and hours and hours. And I think a lot of us, what we do is we practice a little bit, and then we just expect to be game ready all the time. And the reality, I mean, I know a lot of these quotes because I've been presenting on them for over a decade. I mean, it's not only are they near and dear to my heart because they've touched me in a personal way, and they made an impact in my own life, but it's also because repetition breeds retention. And I've been sharing these with folks for years. And so practice, man, that going back to the Allen Iverson quote, we're talking about practice. Yeah, we're talking about practice because practice is that important. Practice makes progress, not perfect. Practice makes progress. Perfection is reserved for God. Practice makes progress, but the only way we can make progress is if we're consistent in the practice.
I love it. That's great. I can definitely cut out a lot of reels out of this podcast, Josh, just with your quotes there. Now, you touch upon imposter syndrome, and that was, my upcoming question for you is how did you handle imposter syndrome, especially during your career's pivotal moments?
Yeah, great question. So if you get a copy of my book, Leading a Legacy, the entire chapter, I think chapter 3, is devoted to imposter syndrome.
Mm-hmm.
To answer your question, how did I get over it or get through it? I haven't yet. I'm still doing it. I mean, I'm still navigating imposter syndrome often. And I've but here's the thing. I've come to be okay with that. I think the word syndrome is what is scary for people. They hear the
Yes.
word syndrome and it's like, oh, that's a bad thing. That's a negative thing. If we call it something like imposter status, like call it something different, I'm okay with that because the reality is I haven't been here before. So while I try to act like I've been here before, the reality is I haven't been here before. So I don't really know what I don't know. But what I do know is that I'm going to keep on taking action. I'm going to keep on getting comfortable being uncomfortable. I'm going to keep on trying and putting forth the effort, the time, the energy. I'm going to get coaching. I'm going to get counseling. I'm going to get mentoring. I'm going to ask for feedback. And when I receive feedback, I receive it as feedback, not criticism, condemnation, and judgment. If
Yeah.
someone's coaching me, it's because they genuinely care about me and my well-being. So I'm receiving it as feedback. So I stay uncomfortable so that I can navigate this regularity of imposter status. We'll call it status from now on.
That's right. No, that's a great one. Now, you brought up the book, so I'm gonna ask you a question regarding the book. Uh,
Sure.
can you tell us what the main takeaways are from your book for inspiring leaders?
Yes. So for years, in fact, most of my life, I was not a leader. That's the perspective that I had. Remember, perspective, the way we view things drives the way we do things. In my mind, a very definitive statement, I was not a leader. But again, that's perspective. And so what I learned back about a little over a decade ago was we're all leaders. We're all leaders, and here's why. Rob, you are one of one. Like there is no one else in the entire world like you. You have your own upbringing and your own life experiences that have shaped you into the person that you are today.
Mm,
So because of that, you have your own perspective, and because you have your own perspective, it's individual and unique to you. No one else in the world shares your perspective, which means you have the ability to be influential.
mm.
So you can influence those around you because of the perspective that you have that no one else does, which means that you're contagious. You can either infect people or you can affect people. And if you can affect people, which we know that you can, then you can affect change. Anyone who's a change agent is a leader. So the message, the overarching theme is how to live today to make an impact for tomorrow. Ultimately, you are a leader because you have perspective, which means you can influence people, which means you can affect change. And the legacy that we're leading today determines the legacy that we're leaving tomorrow. So what are we doing today to make an impact for tomorrow? Because we're all leaders, we have the opportunity to live today and make an impact in those around us to leave a legacy for tomorrow.
Amazing, Josh. And every time I talk to you, I learn so much from you, and it's great to see that different perspective and the different thoughts around leadership and not just your typical textbook answer that you get from some people. So kudos to you on that.
I appreciate it, Rob. Hey, and I'll say this too, and I don't mean to keep on. I'm getting fired up over here, Rob.
No worries.
So I think the reason I'm so passionate about this is because I wish that I knew 20, 30 years ago what I know now. Again, I mean, for most of my life, I
Yeah.
didn't view myself as a leader. So this, I mean, I still feel like I'm a new leader. I mean, ultimately, we're always living in this growth mindset. We want to have this spirit of lifelong learning, but I wish I knew then what I know now because I didn't know. I didn't view myself as a leader for years. I felt like I was more of a follower than anything.
Okay, good. So since you brought that up,
Yeah,
I gotta ask you this question.
come on.
Now, again, if you had a chance to go back and tell your 20-year-old self something, what would you advise your 20-year-old self?
Hire a coach without hesitation. Hire a
Oh.
coach. I mean, obviously, I'm biased because I am a coach, um, but just know I have my own coach who I work with regularly. I still work with my own coach. I see a counselor regularly. I'm also married to a licensed counselor, so I get free counseling even when I don't want it all the time. But here's the thing. Here's what I learned, Rob. Man, I wish I knew. I wish I. First of all, we need to allow ourselves to be vulnerable and really, quite frankly, be put under the scrutiny of others so that they can see what we can't, and to allow them to speak truth to us. I think I would have been ready for that back then, but I may have received it as criticism, condemnation, and judgment. I don't even know that I would have been ready for coaching. But what I know is I needed a coach, and that's the advice I would give my younger self.
Okay, so I'm going to challenge you on that a little bit,
Oh,
Josh. Uh, Again, this is my perspective, and you can see it in a different way. But do you think do you think actually it would be a good thing if you had a coach back then? Because isn't it true that our journeys shape us to who we are today? So you wouldn't have been Josh today if you didn't go through all the things that you talked about earlier. You went through all those experiences and it helped shape who you are today. So do you
yeah.
think that Josh would have been the same Josh if you got that coaching at 20 years old versus who you are now?
Great question, man. We can go deep on this.
Let's go.
To answer your question, no, I know I would not be the same person I am today.
Hmm.
And I'm in a place where I truly love myself today. And it took years for me to get to this place. But I'm a man of faith, and I believe that everything happens for a reason because it's what God is doing in our lives, in us and through us. Um, what I know is as we get older and as I learn through my own mistakes and my own failures along the way, along life's journey, I'm going to share this wisdom that I achieve receive over the years with my children. For example, you mentioned earlier I have 4 children, and the oldest is 13. She's 13 going on 21. I mean, pray for us because we basically got 4 teenagers in the house, but 13, 12, 11, and 8. And there's so many things that I see in them that I remember about myself. And I remember thinking, and there's times where I'm like, oh, I'm getting ready to drop some wisdom on them. I'm getting ready to give them something that's going to change their life. And they're like, okay, get out of here, dad. But the reality is, no, I would not be the same person today if I had a coach back then. Um, but man, I know that there's so many things that I would not have had to go through in order to shape me into who I am today. And I don't know where I'd be today, but I do believe that every person should have someone who they allow to speak truth into them. And I will say this too. I mentioned a coach. When you think of a coach, typically, especially in the professional sense, coaches are people who are paid, right? A mentor can be someone who is just a friend or a confidant. I think if anything, start with a mentor. I mean, at
Yeah,
20 years old, I didn't have money for a coach anyway, and if I did, I wouldn't have spent it on a coach. I mean, because I was too stubborn and too hard headed to realize that's what I needed. But start with a mentor at the very least, and do yourself a favor and listen to them.
that's right. That's right. No, I think having a coach or a mentor or at that age, it's so vital because again, there's some parts and heartaches or headaches that you can avoid going
Yeah,
down. And like you said, I'm also a man of faith where I believe that we're shaped the way we are, and God has put us through this path. And I had to look back on
yeah,
my journey and say, holy shit, like I had to go through this to become who I am today, or else how
yeah.
can I help people, right?
That's right.
How can I
And
share a story with anybody?
and that's the thing, man. Like there's so many conversations that I have that because of my past, I'm able to be credible and qualified,
Yes.
in this conversation. But I also can speak to certain things because I've been through it. I've lived through it. Now, that being said, let's just say if we had this mentality or this thought where it's like, well, what the things that you go through are the things that you grow through. So allow yourself to keep on going through some tough things right now. So ultimately you can be in a different place. Even though I know that, I mean, like, again, I still work with a coach and a counselor. I could choose to not work with them and make my life a little more challenging in the interim. But no, I mean, I've been there, done that. I want help. I need help. I know that I like a phrase I share often in coaching is we can go fast alone, but we can go further together.
Yeah,
And so multiple minds are better than one. I want to keep on working with people who are speaking truth into my life because I need it.
that's right. Amazing. So, Josh, you brought up the fact that you've got 4 kids, and
Mhm.
God bless. Now, I just made a reel recently about and I shared my my personal experience and my personal philosophy on failure and report cards. So I wanted to get your perspective on what do you tell your kids about failure? What do you teach them about failure? And what's your message to them about failure in school, report cards, etc.?
Great question. First, I think it depends on which kid I'm talking to because
Okay.
it matters. Some of one of them may be like, no big deal, and I'm like, no, hang on, it is a big deal. Another one's like, oh, I mean, just themselves up over it. So it matters who we're speaking with, but again, this goes back to perspective. Failure. Most of us hear the word failure and we think that like we just automatically associate it with this negative connotation. But Rob, you and I both know that in order to succeed, we're gonna fail.
Yeah.
We have to go through some failures in order to succeed because if we're not failing, we're not learning. And if we're not learning, we're not growing. And if we're going to grow through anything, we've got to be willing to go through anything. So rather than having this mindset of failure is not an option, I would say take that out of your vocabulary. Failure is a necessity. We
Hmm.
get to embrace failure because we view failure in a different light than I think most people do.
Absolutely. Amazing. That's a great way to put it. Now, I want to shift over to what you're doing today, Josh, in terms of your leadership coaching and training and the automotive industry. So I know there's going to be, hopefully some people in that industry listening to this podcast. And I wanted to ask, what are some of the unique challenges that automotive repair shop owners face when it comes to leading their teams?
It's the two challenges that I think most companies face, which is time and communication, because no one has enough time. And I'm going to throw some massive air quotes around that statement. We don't have time. And I always say, look, we can say that we don't have time, or we can say that we're not making the time. Quite honestly, if we're not making time for something, then it's just not a priority for us. Because if something's a priority, we make time for it.
Mhm.
The problem is a lot of us get in this season of life where we have so much going on at work, at home. We're overwhelmed. We're feeling the stress. And the reality is, in our minds, we think, well, all these things are priorities. Everything's a priority. If everything's a priority, nothing's a priority. So let's redefine what priorities are first and foremost, and then let's make time for the priorities that truly matter because we have to make time for your people. So communication is a massive challenge, but when you make time to communicate with your team members, that goes such a long way. 70% of employees leave companies because they don't feel valued, they don't feel heard, seen, understood, acknowledged.
Yeah.
And it's because their leaders are simply not meeting with them. And that's why the phrase people don't leave bad jobs, they leave bad leaders, that's a real thing. Now, granted, there are definitely some opportunity areas in the job aspect, but most people leave bad leaders because they don't have either clarity or direction. The two things that every person needs and deserves in any relationship is clarity and direction, and they're often not getting that clarity and direction. But think about it like this. If you're a leader and you're leading people, and anyone who's listening, I'm encouraging you to really think about this. If you are formally leading people, and you struggle to make time to have one-on-ones with your team members, let's call it once a month, which I think still kind of undershooting it. I would say once every 2 weeks is probably a good cadence, but let's call it once a month. If you're struggling to make time to meet with your team member in a one-on-one setting once a month, we're talking about an hour. For someone who in a month's time frame is putting in a total of 160 to 200 hours worth of their time
Yeah.
to help you in your business, you can't give them an hour. Your team members are the greatest priority. Your team members are what matters the most. Make time for your team. I mean, make time for them. Otherwise, again, they're not going to feel seen. They're not going to feel heard. They're not going to feel acknowledged or understood. And they start saying, you know what? Rob never even meets with me. Like this other job, they keep on calling me they're trying to get me over there.
Yeah.
Maybe the grass is greener on the other side. And the reality is the grass is green where we water it. So leaders, water the grass for your team. Help them understand that they are heard, understood, valued, and acknowledged, because they're the ones who matter the most in your business.
Absolutely. I couldn't agree with you any more there, Josh. Now, from your experience, Josh, what are some common mistakes that you see leaders making in the automotive industry?
Good question. In the industry, I see a lot of high performing team members who do really well at their jobs. They've mastered these processes, and then they get promoted to a formal leadership role.
Yeah.
They've never had any leadership coaching and training. And it's like going from a player to a coach. And so here's an example. You could work with a lot of automotive repair shops. So if you're listening, if you're an automotive repair shop owner, a service manager, service advisor, you are our ideal client. We work with you to help you stay in the coach's seat. A lot of folks struggle with staying in the coach's seat. They go from player to coach, and they see their players doing these processes that they've mastered, which has got them to the coach's seat to begin with. They see them doing these processes, quote unquote, incorrectly, or in other words, differently. So we jump out of the coach's seat to go and try to save the day. And what we're doing is we're inadvertently and unintentionally stunting everyone's growth and development, including our own. And so it's the old adage of give a man to fish and he'll eat for a day, or teach a man to fish and he'll eat for a lifetime. We want to teach you to teach your team how to fish, how to lead, how to coach, how to train, and how to manage. And unfortunately, there's not a lot of leadership coaching in the automotive repair industry. And that's really why my business partner and I have kind of broken into this space. We're hitting the ground running, because we're getting clients, client after client who is saying, hey, I need performance coaching. I need leadership coaching. My business partner is the performance coach. I'm a leadership coach. There's a lot of performance coaching in the industry, and they're great at what they do. There's a lot of performance coaching services out there that I highly respect and who are great at what they do. But what my business partner and I bring to the industry that no one else offers is a combination of customized weekly calls that are leadership and performance based, because there's not a lot of it out there, and definitely there's none of it in terms of the combination of the two.
I love that, Josh. And that was going to be my next question for you is, what's your model and how do you differentiate from the rest of the crowd? One of my issues with any type of training for organizations is, you go in there, you do a workshop, a day, 2 days, or whatever it is. How much are people taking away, and what's the sustainability model there? Because you mentioned it. Your leaders who are supposed to be leading people, if they don't have an hour a month or whenever to sit back and give you one-on-one, how much time are they spending coaching you?
None.
Right?
That's the thing. Because in a lot of organizations, it's not just the automotive repair industry. This goes across every industry.
Yes.
We fail at effectively onboarding, properly training, and consistently coaching. Those three areas, if we onboard, train, and coach our team members, it will make a world of difference. But unfortunately, we're not seeing that. You mentioned training, and when I host workshops or different trainings that I have, I let everyone know at the very beginning of training, hey, first and foremost, repetition breeds retention.
Mhm.
But just know that studies show that 70% of what you're going to get today will be forgotten by tomorrow,
Yes.
and 90% will be forgotten in 30 days. So take notes, take a lot of notes. What I do, I encourage them to make a list. Make a list that's numbered 1 through 10. And these are empty boxes that you can fill out. And over the course of the day of training or the week long of training, whatever it is, when you get some kind of nugget that I share or some kind of content or something that a process that we talk about, and you say, hey, I want to start incorporating that in my own life at home and at work, go back to that page where the list is and write it down. Because at the end of the training, I'm going to ask that you prioritize that list in terms of which one you want to focus on first. Because when we focus on behavior changes and forming habits,
Yes.
studies show that if we're only focused on one and only one behavior change, we have an 85% success rate in achieving that behavior change. But if we're trying to change two behaviors at the exact same time, the 85% drops down to 40%. And if we're trying to change three at the same time, it drops all the way down to 5%. And Rob, I mean, I'm not the only one who's been to a training. I'm like, oh yeah, that's great. That's great. That's great. There's all these things. And I'm like, I want to do all those things, but it's not sustainable. It's simply not sustainable. And so we want to focus on one, change that behavior, form that habit, then move on to the next one. But yeah, it's consistent. It's consistent over time. Again, it's going back to the practice. Training and practice to me are simultaneous. They're one and the same. So are you onboarding effectively? Are you training properly? And are you coaching consistently? If you're not, you're missing a massive opportunity.
And that's some great advice there, Josh. Now, I want to take us to uh, emotional intelligence and the importance in organization and leadership, especially. Now, what roles does emotional intelligence play in effectively leading people? And I want you to think of it from a I'll put in a question for you as well. And that's being like, how do you balance a fine line of being a friend to somebody versus leading them?
Connection before content. And so I think if we can focus on at the heart of any relationship, it's built on two things: safety and trust.
Mm.
And I mentioned earlier, clarity and direction is what we're trying to provide. We can't provide clarity and direction if we don't create safety and trust. So at the end of the day, people don't care how much you know until they know how much you care.
Yeah.
So if we can approach this relationship from by way of a connection first, let me get to know who you are. Let me get to know who Rob Cameronport is. I want to know your upbringing, and I want to know your life experience. I mean, whatever you're comfortable and willing to share with me early on, I want to know who I'm working with. I want to know, why do you think the way that you do? Why do you operate the way that you do? I want to know your past, your present, your future. What are your goals and your hopes and dreams? As a leader, I want to help you achieve anything and everything that you're looking to achieve. So I want to connect with you first in order to provide this content piece second. Now, regarding the emotional intelligence, I have to, it's easier to navigate a relationship with someone regarding the emotional intelligence side of things if you know who they are first. So being able to understand who I'm working with and lead empathetically. I'm asking a lot of questions. I'm listening, and I'm listening empathetically. Empathizing with someone doesn't mean that we necessarily have to experience the same situation as that person, but it does mean that we can imagine their circumstances and accept their feelings without invalidating them.
Yes.
And the word here is invalidating. I think too many of us, we're waiting for someone to stop talking so we can tell them what we think we need to say. So we're listening to reply versus listening to understand, which means we're simply invalidating and dismissing everything that was just shared with us. So recognize who you're working with, why they think the way they do, how they operate. When you have that understanding, you can more adequately and more effectively lead with emotional intelligence. And furthermore, I want to kind of tie into something that is in the same vein as emotional intelligence, and that's emotional regulation.
Mm.
A lot of us struggle with emotional regulation. I really believe that the greatest skill set any of us can possess is emotional regulation, because emotional maturity is having feelings, but not letting our feelings have us. And so when we know that when emotions are high, logic tends to be low. How can we regulate our emotions and keep our and make decisions based in a healthy, logical way.
Amazing. No, I think, you nailed it in that part, Josh. That's something a lot of people, in my opinion, struggle with is making those decisions when they're highly emotional, and all they really need to do sometimes is just walk away, take a breather, and learn what that regulation means, and not take things personally, right?
I think that something I've learned over the years is we often make decisions based on emotion,
Yes.
but we take action based on conviction.
Yes.
So, when I'm emotionally charged, good, bad, or indifferent, I can be really angry or I can be really excited. In my mind at the time, I'm thinking, I got to do this. I need to do this, or, hey, I'm so excited. I want to do this now. I'm making these decisions. I need to recognize what state of mind I'm in before I take action. And
Yes.
then I can bring my emotions down and think in a more logical way. And I realize, okay, is it really a good idea to do what I thought I was going to do? Because now, if that's the case, and I can think in a logical way, I'm going to take action because now it's backed by conviction. It's not backed by emotion any longer. It's backed by conviction.
That's right. Amazing. Thanks for adding that piece to it. Now, we've come to almost the end of our show, but before we stop and end the show, I've come to a segment where I call rapid fire questions.
Oh,
I'll be firing some questions at you, and the
okay.
first thing that comes to mind, you can say it out loud. So first question for you, Josh, is what's your favorite coat?
Favorite what?
Coat.
Coat?
Yes.
Coat. My favorite coat.
Yeah. The
Uh,
quotations you.
Oh, quote. Sorry, I'm
Oh,
like,
yes, sorry.
a blazer, a blazer. No,
Yeah.
favorite quote. My favorite quote comes from Maya Angelou. She says, "I've learned that people will forget what you said. I've learned that people will forget what you did, but people will never forget how you made them feel." I
Yeah.
love that.
Amazing. What is the best advice that you've ever received?
Oh man, Rob, that is a tough question. Okay, best advice that I ever received. Rapid fire. Save your money. Save your money.
Interesting. What is the one common leadership practice you believe is outdated or overrated, and why?
Oh, another great question. Outdated and overrated. Um, it's going to sound a little controversial, but
That's okay.
I think that a lot of meetings are a waste of time. There's a way that we can redefine what a meeting could and should look like, but I think historically most meetings are a waste of time, and I'll just leave it at that.
Awesome. What is the most difficult emotion to control as a leader?
Wow, man, these are some. I'm not doing a good job of rapid firing back to you. Um, I think for me, it's optimism, because what happens is things are moving, things are going great, and maybe even it's a new hire. You just bring someone on board, or you meet a new connection. It's like, this is great. This is the best thing since sliced bread. And what I'm doing is I'm creating a ceiling where it's amazing, and all it can do is go down from here. And I need to recognize, like, hey, Josh, like, it's okay to be excited, but recognize there's gonna be a lot of room for growth, high and low. And so I know it may be a strange answer, but I would say optimism would be.
Interesting.
Yeah.
That's a very interesting answer, Josh. What is the biggest gap in leadership in organizations today?
Communication, hands down. Biggest gap is communication. When there's a breakdown in communication, voids get created, and oftentimes negativity fills those voids. Communication across the board. That's at work or at home.
Couldn't agree with you more there. And lastly, where can people find Josh Parnell?
Thank you, Rob. You can find me at my website, which is thebeardedleader.com. It's pretty easy to remember, thebeardedleader.com. I'm also on social media on Instagram, The Bearded Leader, Facebook, and in LinkedIn, just Josh Parnell. Please connect with me. I'd love to connect with you and learn more about who you are. I have a Facebook group. It's a leadership Facebook group that Rob is in quite a bit, and I appreciate your engagement and your activity there, man. You are a driver of that group, and I could not thank you enough for that. That's amazing. And so, yeah, come join the group. It's called Limitless Leadership. But yeah, that's where you can find me. I'd love to connect with you.
Amazing. Again, I want to thank you so much, Josh, for being with me this afternoon. I greatly appreciate your inspiring stories, your experience, and your knowledge that you've shared with the folks out there. And I'm sure, people have taken a lot from this podcast. For those out there who have any questions or comments for Josh, drop it in the box below, or you know where to find them. And again, thank you so much, Josh, and everybody else out there today for joining and listening in. See you in the next episode, everybody. Take care.